Welcome to Cattle Connect, your insight into Alabama's beef cattle industry. I'm your host, Kayla Greer, and this is Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Hey there, cattlemen, and welcome back to the 36th episode of Season 1 of the Cattle Connect podcast. Remarkably, it is already Halloween, and that means that October Beef Month is just about to call it a wrap for 2024. But we still have a few days remaining, and they're going to be good ones, so stay tuned. So today, as the title of this episode implies, ACA Director of Consumer Outreach Josie Jones is joining me in the Cattle Connect studio to discuss the state of the consumer. There's yet a little election pun right there. Josie just returned back to Alabama from a trip to Denver, where she goes each year to a conference at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, and it's a conference called Partnership in Action. It's basically an annual gathering of state beef checkoff staff and National Beef It's What's for Dinner brand staff, and the plans for the next fiscal year are rolled out, and the states are kind of given their marching orders. So, quick overview before we get too much into what we're going to talk about today. For those who might be new listeners out there, here's like the 10,000 story view of the beef checkoff. So in Alabama, for every head of cattle sold, $2 per head is collected, and it's pulled into a pool of money, and it's $1 for the state beef checkoff and $1 for the national program. So 50 cents of that leaves Alabama. It goes out to Denver to the Cattlemen's Beef Board, where they allocate it to contractors who fulfill the mission of the beef checkoff nationally and internationally. And meanwhile, the other $1.50 that stays here in the state goes to extend national beef promotions specifically to Alabama consumers. And it also funds production research and youth programs, which Reed McGuire on our staff oversees. So Josie handles beef promotion on the consumer side, and Reed heads up producer education, youth development, research. And then I come in with handling producer communications to let you all know about how your dollars are going to work and to make sure you know about upcoming programs that pertain to you. So again, that was like a bird's eye view of the beef checkoff. If you'd like to learn more, you can always go to bamabeef.org/checkoff or www.mybeefcheckoff.org. But getting back to consumers, Josie, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably the most valuable session that you get from the conference, and arguably the most important piece of it all, is defining who the target audience is.
Oh, absolutely. The conference has a lot of great takeaways every single year. So we have a lot of time to collaborate with the other states and just kind of discuss what's working across the U.S. for the different areas, and maybe some things that aren't, maybe some things that need to be tweaked or changed, or maybe coming up with new ideas with other states from a program that they're doing and bringing it back to Alabama. I also really enjoy visiting with our national partners to talk about the resources that they have for the upcoming year based off of some of these things that we're going to talk about today with our target audiences. And then it's a good time for us to go to them and say, hey, here are maybe some resources that we need in Alabama or Tennessee or Mississippi that you haven't necessarily thought about being in Denver. So it's a really good time for us to talk about some specific needs that we have and figure out as a group, all of the state beef checkoff councils, what we're really working to achieve in the upcoming year. Additionally, since we do all of our budget planning for the beef checkoff program here in Alabama, kind of that late October to December range, it's a great time for me to go ahead and start thinking about the programs that we have upcoming. I can look over some things that we've done in the past year and figure out what worked and what didn't and what needs to be tweaked. But of all of the things that happened in those 3 days spent in Denver, I would have to say that my absolute favorite is the update on the American consumer. I'm a numbers girl. I'm a stats girl. I love to look at the return on investment for programs. So this is a great way for me to kind of combine our numbers and what we see here in Alabama with what they're seeing as trends across the nation and figure out how that all fits together.
Right. And so just so everyone's clear with what we're talking about, since you and I are both marketers, this is kind of an everyday term for us. Can you clarify what we mean when we say target audience as it relates specifically to the Beef It's What's for Dinner brand?
Absolutely. If you talk to any marketing professional, that phrase is probably going to come up in conversation because it's something our world kind of revolves around. Right. But it's not as complicated as a lot of people think. Your target audience is really just a group of people that you're marketing something to. Typically, it's based on a similarity that they all have, and we'll talk a little bit about the similarities of our beef target audience. But in reality, it's just that group of people that you're marketing towards.
Okay, so when it comes to beef promotion, we aren't specifically at it to spend dollars toward people who are already buying beef for their families, like you, me, and probably a lot of our listeners, right? We're going to go after the folks who are trying to decide between a beef meal or another protein, or maybe trying to decide if beef is even part of a healthy lifestyle and if they want to incorporate it into their family's menu. So you, me, and our listeners already know that. We want beef on our menu. So we don't want to spend too much of our time or resources marketing to ourselves. We want to market to those who need to choose beef, right?
Exactly. The goal of this is to target those people who are on the fence about it and encourage them to choose beef in any situation. I know a lot of our producers know the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's kind of how I think with beef marketing as well. If we already have a group that is consuming beef and they're going to loyally choose that product, there's no reason for us to spend those dollars that could go towards capturing additional consumers and additional customers and encouraging them to choose beef. So a lot of times our producers will say like, hey, I don't necessarily see all the beef It's What's for Dinner advertising that we're seeing happening, or you say is happening across the state. What's the reason that I don't see it? And the reason is you already eat beef. We know that you're choosing it. We know that you trust the beef industry, that you understand the nutritional benefits behind beef, and that you're going to choose it because it's kind of your preferred protein.
Right.
And so instead of spending those dollars on you as a cattle producer, we're going to take them and spend them on consumers and encourage more people to purchase this product so that we can sustain the beef industry long term.
Right. Make you successful. That's what the beef checkoff is all about. So, Josie, let's not waste any time. Based off what you learned in Denver, I'd like for you to break down the different target audiences, now that we all know what that is, what the different target audiences are nationally, and then please end and elaborate specifically on the Southeastern audience.
Sure thing. So the common answer that you hear on this podcast or in any conversation with anyone from the office here in Alabama when we talk about our target audience is the millennial household decision makers. And that's your parents of kids who need quick and easy and nutritious meals. They're running out the door. They're trying to get kids to practice. They've got family headed in all directions because they're the ones that are typically trying to decide which protein options to get.
Right.
Your older demographic typically has kind of made up their mind by now on what they're going to eat or what they're not going to eat. We still market to them some, but a lot of them are known as loyal beef consumers. Mm-hmm. They love that product. They trust that product, and they've been eating it for years and years and years. And so I kind of think of it in terms of this, like my mom and my grandmother, they both know how to cook a pot roast. And every Sunday, if I go home to visit them, we're eating pot roast because that's what we do on Sundays. But me, as a younger consumer, I'm starting my family and deciding what a normal week looks like for us. And so I'm really having to make those decisions.
Yeah, and you have, you know, our older audience has those dishes that they've been preparing for a long time that they know they enjoy. So the promotions that we target in their direction are more of just like reminders to include beef on their weekly menu instead of here's a new recipe which you or I might enjoy.
Right. And then on the flip side of things, we got to talk about the opposite end of the spectrum. And now we're talking about Gen Z and all of the younger generations that are coming along. But a lot of their decisions right now are based on what their family has done. So either that older generation who is teaching them how to cook these beef dishes that are classics in their family or giving them that word of advice. I know me with starting a new house, the first thing I'm going to do if I don't know how to do something is call my mom and say, hey, Mom, how do I cook this cut of beef? Or how do I cook, you know, whatever it may be? How do I make an apple pie? If I ever have a question, I'm calling her. And so we know they have that resource. And again, we still market to them some on specific things, talking about convenience, which is a big thing for this generation, and the nutritional benefits, and then also some sustainability things. But the vast majority of the time, they have that resource in their family around them, and they're still deciding whether or not they're going to be the ones to cook it. Additionally, people are moving out at an older age. So a lot of them are consuming beef regularly because they're still around their parents. And so their parents are preparing that, and that's what everybody's going to eat. So that's how we kind of narrowed it down to this millennial household decision maker. That's your very broad general target audience. But even with that target audience, that varies across the nation. Looking at what forces them to make their decisions, you know, what's the cause and effect of this? Our national partners have taken this group, our target audience group, and then kind of made some additional qualifications to help us understand how to market to them. So they call these the market groups, and it's based on the hows and whys of all their decision processes. So a quick overview of those. We have 4 different market groups across the U.S., and I'm going to talk about the other 3 first, and then we'll wrap it up with Alabama's market group.
All right, hit me.
So the first one would be the inquisitive group. And this includes states like California, Colorado. They're the ones who want to know the process. They want to know the facts and the details and the true factual information. They want to take that information and make their own decision. So The groups in these states are marketing with the data, the nutritional information, the facts about sustainability, and the value for the product. They like numbers.
Okay.
So they work a lot with our national partner to take this information and put that in their ads. If you go there, you're probably going to see the stats on their advertisements, whether that's a billboard, a magazine ad, anything like that. It's all about the numbers.
Interesting.
From there, we're going to go over to the believer side of the world. So this is Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. They believe in relationships, right? They want to hear information from people that they trust. So these associations and organizations are working to build that relationship with them.
Get a little rapport.
Exactly. Influencers are used a lot in this region because they can take people that consumers already trust, offer them some beef education, and these people are going to share because they have that relationship with their followers. So it's all about building a true relationship, whether that's the producers in those areas, building the relationship with the consumers, or like I said, an influencer. That could be a chef, that could be a nutritionist, a dietitian, anyone who works in that realm, so that they have someone to go to when they have a question. All right, from there, we have our beef conscious group. In my brain, they're kind of a lot like the inquisitive group. They like the numbers, they like the information, but they also want that relationship element. So they're kind of a mix of the two.
Their little hybrid action there.
Exactly. Arizona is a good example of who fits into this group. New York is also in there. And then a lot of our northeastern states fall into this.
Okay.
So they want that factual information, but they also need to hear it from a source that they trust. So we utilize the information we get from the national level for them, along with influencers to really reach them. They want the details, but they also want to know the people and know the story behind them.
Okay.
And then we get to Alabama.
Here we are.
All right. So this group is one that is really built up of the southeastern region, which makes sense for a lot of us. It's your Mississippi, your Tennessee, your Georgia, your Alabama, your Virginias, Louisiana. We're all about traditions. That's what we're known for. We have heritage, we have traditions, and we see that across our state. So it's no surprise that we fall in the beef traditionalists group. And these are your consumers who make decisions based off of what their family has done in past generations. You mentioned
As
that
we just mentioned.
favorite meal. You know, if my grandmother cooked a beef pot roast this way every Sunday, I'm probably going to cook a beef pot roast that same way. And
Because
so,
it can't be done any better.
right,
Ever.
Grandmother always makes it best.
That's right.
So we make those decisions based off of what we've always known to be. This is a great place to be because it means that our loyal beef consumers who have been for generations and generations are going to keep eating beef. They don't just suddenly change something on a trend. They don't just suddenly decide, and today I'm going to wake up and no longer consume beef. But on the flip side of things, it can be a little bit difficult with marketing because when we have new information, it takes a lot of time to grab a hold in these markets. So there's definitely positives and negatives to every group, and ours is no exception, but I'm very happy to be in the traditionalist group because those are my folks, and I believe in some heritage and some tradition myself.
The age-old question, what's for dinner? Maybe it's ground beef tacos or sirloin steak kebabs. What about beef chili, meatloaf, or sloppy joes? With hundreds of recipes on beef, it's what'sfordinner.com. The next time that question comes up, you'll know the answer. Beef. It's what's for dinner. Funded by beef farmers and ranchers.
Okay, so that was a great overview of the different audience segments, the demand drivers behind why they are the way that they are. And now that we have learned a little bit about who the Southeastern target audience is, I want you to dig a little deeper into the mechanics of why that's our target. And before you explain, Josie, I would like to add that the market research team at National Cattlemen's Beef Association does an incredible job of tracking consumer trends. All these numbers that Josie's about to throw at us, it comes straight from their team. They do a great job. And they, like I said, they use it to track consumer trends and learn how dollars are being spent in the protein market. So, Josie, here's your chance. Get into the weeds a little bit and about what our target audience is doing when it comes to making decisions about incorporating beef into their diet.
So I mentioned a little bit ago that I'm a numbers person. So I'm going to have to pull in the reins on this one a little bit because we don't have an all-day podcast. But a couple of the main stats that I brought home this year that I felt like were the most important around beef consumption are comparing it to other proteins. We know in the state of Alabama, we have loyal meat consumers.
Oh, yeah.
We're not typically meat alternative people, and we're going to get into a couple stats about that in a minute. But most of the time, if anyone around here is going to try that, they're doing it to do that. They want to try it and see what it is. but they're going to eat beef.
It's another option, not a competition.
Exactly. They're going to eat beef, they're going to eat pork, they're going to eat chicken.
Right.
And so we kind of look at those all next to each other to see, as the beef people, how we can kind of measure that against its peers, if you will.
Right.
So talking about the options for proteins. In the state, and this data is from across the U.S. because that's how they measure it, but we got to talk a little bit about, our market groups specifically. The top choice of protein in 2024, chicken and beef are typically always the top two.
Yeah.
And chicken's a hard one to compete with solely because it's inexpensive.
Right.
We know we have a quality product. The amount of time that it takes to raise it, it's always just going to be a little bit more expensive.
Right.
So chicken came in at 44% of all consumers choosing it as the top choice of protein, and beef was right behind it at 35%.
Okay, that's not bad.
And that has increased from previous years.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
beef has given chicken a run for its money, especially when you start looking at the price difference.
Yeah.
Going from that, those choosing a protein, not based on price, but based on true preference, whether that's taste, eating experience, anything like that.
Right.
Beef wins by a landslide.
Always.
We're looking at over a 20-point difference. So anytime a family is getting together and they're having a special meal or some kind of get-together, beef is a top competitor for that spot because people love it. And it goes back to that tradition thing.
And it's just such a centerpiece, You can always do something fun with the chicken dish. It's very versatile, but beef is like that wow moment.
Exactly. And the other thing, you mentioned versatility. This year, it took over the swap. So in previous years, when consumers were polled on what was the most versatile cut of meat or type of meat, chicken had won previously.
Right.
We made that swap this year. Beef is now the number one most versatile cut of meat or type of meat.
Awesome.
So that's always great to hear. It means that our consumers are learning how to use the different cuts and the value of it in different recipes as well, which is always fantastic.
That's what I was going to say. That's really exciting. And I would attribute part of that to the work of the Beef Checkoff program.
Absolutely.
Because there is so much effort into marketing beef as a versatile dish. So many people think you can just have steak or you can just have a burger or you could just have pot roast, because in our little traditionalist land down here, those are the probably top 3 favorite beef dishes. But gosh, if you go to beefiswhatsfordinner.com, you will see the thousands of beef recipes. And yeah, it might be a spin on a traditional dish like a taco or spaghetti, but there are so many ways to change it and make it a little different for the palate and for the family weekly menu.
And I mentioned earlier about our market group specifically that one of the negatives is it takes a lot of time for new information to be accepted. Mm-hmm. Our very first podcast of October Beef Month this year was with Mr. Ed Watley, who previously filled the role here for beef education. And he mentioned that when he started his job in grocery stores, there was pretty much steaks, ground beef, and roast.
Yeah.
And that was it. So it's very neat to see that, as you mentioned, through the Beef Checkoff program, our consumers are picking up on the fact that they can use beef for so much more than just a burger or a roast or a steak on the grill. And that's taken a hold here in Alabama too. Good. Even just with conversations with consumers, we're hearing a lot more about cuts like the flat iron or the chuck eye steak, which are newer developments thanks to the Beef Checkoff program. So it means that they're getting that information, and not only are they hearing it, they're taking it and utilizing it, which is super important.
Yeah, and I would add to that, not long ago I went to the grocery store specifically looking for a flank steak and halfway expecting not to find it. Just going off of the like you said, you're so used to seeing specific cuts in the meat case. I went to a local grocery store. I did not expect to find what I was looking for. I thought I'd have to go to a local butcher shop. But lo and behold, there was a flank steak. And so I was like, okay, we have come a long way in 10 years. When I first started here at the Cattleman's, it was like, flank steak, what is that? And now it's a normal thing that you hear about all the time. And you can find it in a local grocery store now.
And the reason this is so important is we go back to the value in the beef industry. By finding these other alternative cuts, we're able to add value to something that originally ended up in grind.
Right.
It ended up in your ground beef, which is great. We need ground beef. But when we're able to take something out of a ground beef that may be $3.99, $4.99 a pound and turn it into a $7.99 a pound cut, it adds more value back to those producers,
yes,
most of whom are listening, to those carcasses so that they can make more to then turn around and put that back into their operation. And that's something super important. And why the Beef Checkoff program focuses so much on research of meat cuts is so that they can continue to add value back to those carcasses in ways other than just additional weight.
Beautifully said.
So back to all the numbers. We talked a little bit about our top choices of protein, whether that's for value or for flavor. But another thing that I found super interesting is how often our consumers are eating beef. So I mentioned that they love it for a get-together, but this isn't just kept for the holidays. When we're talking about on a weekly basis, our consumers are eating beef. A minimum of 72% of them are eating it weekly.
Oh, wow.
Which is great.
Yeah.
And again, it ranks right up there with chicken, and there's a pretty large gap between both of those and then going down to pork and fish. So we know that they're consistently choosing beef every single week as something to put on their menu, put on their meal plan, and consume with their families. Another thing to note with that, I mentioned meat alternatives earlier. In Alabama, we don't have as much of a competition with meat alternatives as we do the others because, again, we're traditionalist. We like what's always been around. But an interesting thing to me is people eating meat alternatives are also eating beef weekly 73% of the time. So it's not something where they're choosing meat alternatives entirely as the only option. Yeah. Sometimes they may choose it for a specific dish or something like that. But a lot of times they're choosing to go back to that product that they know and love for at least one other meal that week.
Yeah.
We have the common conversation with consumers here of, do you feel like you're going to lose an entire consumer group to meat alternatives? And we're not seeing that to be the case. We've also seen the average group of people who follow a vegan or vegetarian diet decrease by half over the past year.
Oh, cool.
So it went from 6% to 3%, which is a major change as well. It means that people are going back to trusting these products and realizing the importance that they hold nutritionally. And then also just for the environment, they're learning more about how it's produced and how it's a more sustainable product than they realized before. So,
and I wonder, too, how the wellness trend plays into that. You know, there's the health trend. And that's one thing.
Right.
And so that's when the whole vegan vegetarian thing moved in, was health. Oh, I'm doing this for my health. But now there's wellness. And that brings in a whole other industry and a whole other group of information in terms of education. And so you take health is part of wellness, but there's a whole other thing. And that's where beef can come in and kind of win people back. Because it's like, okay, well, if you don't think it's a healthy product, which it is, by the way, you know, it offers so much more in the wellness scope. And so these trends that we see in the consumer marketplace, they're helping buy consumers back to the beef market. So yay for that.
Absolutely. And the great thing about it, too, is our consumers are putting all of that together. We talked a lot at this conference this year about the importance of protein, and that's a trend that we're seeing come over, but I think it's more than a trend. We all know that protein's important, but people are starting to realize that different protein sources don't necessarily add up to be the same thing.
They're not all even.
They're not. And a common thing that we talk about is how your body's able to intake that protein and utilize it. And beef is ranked as one of the top sources for protein that your body can actually truly utilize. So when you're comparing nutrition labels, 14 grams of protein to 14 grams of protein, it's not always apples to apples.
Absolutely not.
And so consumers are realizing this, which is fantastic.
Awesome.
It means that a lot of our people that work in those industries are saying, hey, beef is a great source for this. It's easy to cook. Everybody likes how it tastes. So they're able to kind of put together that whole picture. And you made the mention of from the health trend to the wellness trend. That's how it fits into the wellness trend. They enjoy eating it, so they're not depriving themselves of something they love. It's also healthy. It's also accessible. So it kind of checks all the boxes for everything that they need to make a good meal. Another thing to note is that consumers are cooking at home more, which is something that affects us on the marketing side of things because it changes how we direct people to information. A lot of this can be attributed to inflation, the cost of things going up. We see a higher rate of inflation in eating out and takeout services than we do in groceries. So even though everybody's talking about how expensive groceries are, it's even more expensive to go and get food. And we recognize that. And so one of the things that we're doing with our national partners is working to produce even more of those great recipes that you can find on beefitswhatsfordinner.com to share with consumers. And some of those are things like restaurant favorites, you know, maybe something that they've always gotten out and about if they can't necessarily afford to take their whole family out and about every single week. How can we take this dish and make it at home? And so of the people that they polled, 74% of people cook and eat beef at home. That's a consistent number. It hasn't really changed a lot, but it means that we have that consistent clientele to eat beef at home for those recipes. Additionally, 35% say that they're planning to cook more beef at home in the coming year, which is fantastic. And 93% of all people who say they routinely cook at home are going to continue to routinely cook at home.
Okay, so they're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere. So on the state side of things, that lets us know, hey, we need to advertise that we have this resource for recipes, that we have recipes for things they would normally get in restaurants, and we can teach them how to utilize some of those unique cuts if they don't already know how to cook with them, so that they can take this product that they love, cook it adequately at home so that they'll still enjoy it. And that'll continue to keep up this demand for beef even as things change on the restaurant scene. The last thing that I want to mention before we move on is we're seeing, it goes back to trends, but we're seeing people wanting to be more involved in where their food comes from. And a large part of the discussion was the millennial generation and really Gen Z wanting to get back into old traditions. We're seeing a lot of homesteading movements and things like that. Yeah. Not everybody can raise cattle in their backyard. And so what we're seeing with that is people just wanting to learn more about how this product is grown. Even if they can't make it themselves, they want to see more information about how beef producers produce beef. They want to know what goes into a cattle operation. And so this is a great opportunity for us to provide those sustainability resources and more information about Alabama farms and all of the things happening across the U.S. to get this product on their plates. It also means they're open to this information. They're open to learning more about agriculture, which is a fantastic place to be in because it gives us the opportunity to give consumers information that they want, and they're always going to be more receptive of that.
Yeah, and I think, too, there's, we've seen this kind of pendulum shift. So many years ago, consumers didn't care where their product came from as long as it was in the meat case and they could buy it for a good price.
Right.
Check. Well, then there was this huge shift into, I want to know everything about my product and I don't trust the industry until I can figure out the information for myself. Now we're seeing the shift back of, okay, well, I want to eat this product and I want to trust it and I'm willing to learn from the people who are producing it instead of finding my information on social media by whoever wrote it and says that they're a qualified person to say these things. So I think that's a really good place to be, kind of a happy medium between the two, because that, like you said, allows us to present the facts from trusted people about a product that we all know and love and want to enjoy. So that's exciting.
It is. And we talked a lot about the fact that consumers are more trusting of producers and veterinarians now than ever.
Good.
They rank them above news sources. They rank them above social media. They rank them above Google. So now is really the time to share information with those around you. They're looking for you. They want to hear your story. They want to hear about your product. Even if you're not the one that's handing them that package of ground beef at the end of the day, they want to know the whole story behind it. So any segment of the beef industry, they want that education. And the fact that they're now trusting producers and veterinarians more than news sources shows that they trust these people because they believe that they'll get factual information.
Right.
Which I think is a super important thing to realize. You talked about that spectrum changing so much. We haven't always been in that place. And so the fact that we're here now says a lot about our producers that are sharing their stories because consumers see them as a reliable source of information.
Yeah, so here's your plug. If you have been on the fence about starting your farm Facebook page,
do it now.
Now's a good time to get on the market.
Save the date. The 82nd Annual ACA Convention and Trade Show will be here before you know it. Join us in the heart of Birmingham, February 21st and 22nd, 2025. Be on the lookout for more information coming soon.
So, Josie, what do you do to market to those beef traditionalists that we've been talking about, our Alabama consumers? How is the Alabama Beef Checkoff trying to reach them?
So we have mentioned over and over and over again on this that we work with a very traditional group. And so here at the state office, we spend a lot of time figuring out how we can reach the traditional group through new avenues. It's a really big balance that we have to keep up. But we try and reach them at sources they already trust. The first one that comes to mind for me is our partnership with Alabama Media Group, also known as AL.com.
Yep.
I don't know about most of you listening, but I have always been an AL.com reader. I've been reading it since I was in high school. And so anytime something's happening in Alabama, that's going to be the first website I go to.
Yeah.
That's where I get my news information. That's where I get my sports information. It's kind of an all-in-one stop for me. So we work with them to do some beef advertising because we recognize that our consumers across the state typically prefer them for news information and are going to choose it over a national partner.
And even if you're not intentionally going to your web browser and typing in AL.com to find your news, you're probably scrolling on Facebook, and because they have such a huge following and a huge footprint in the state, they're just naturally the source that's going to be there for you to click on. And so when you do click on it and land there, we want you to see beef when you get there.
Exactly. And on top of that, we're reaching them around very traditional things. I mentioned the heritage earlier. Anytime I talk to anyone from outside of Alabama about Alabama, one of the first things that's going to come up is sports. We've got football. And we recognize that this is something that families build relationships around. I grew up in an Auburn family. My grandmother, huge Auburn fan, diehard fan, so I was born into that naturally. And I know a lot of our listeners are the same way. You have those families in your community, they're either Alabama fans or they're Auburn fans, or even if they're another SEC team, that's a family heritage thing that they have.
Absolutely.
And our fall is planned around that. There are so many parts of our life, everybody looks forward to football season. And so we work with a lot of these different opportunities to make sure that we're advertising around something that our consumers love. Additionally, outside of just having football on fall weekends, which is already great, we have tailgating food. And this is something that we also all love. I have plenty of friends that aren't necessarily the biggest football fans in terms of they don't know what a first down is, they don't know all the details to all the penalties, but they love a beef slider. And so this is a great way for us to reach both sides of the family and reach them in a way that makes sense to both sides of the family. So we work to do a lot of sports advertising. And I mentioned earlier, like the traditional partnered with the new. So the traditional side of this is that we're advertising around SEC football. The new is that we're doing it now through connected TV. We're doing it through social media instead of as much on-site coverage. It's more bang for our buck. We're able to reach more Alabama consumers with fewer dollars, and we're able to reach them in a way with something that's going to stick in their brain and kind of direct them to future ads and future ways to use this information more than just seeing it on a sign.
Right. And there's this huge trend of cutting the cord, whether that's your truck radio, maybe now you're listening to streaming radio, or maybe it's your cable at your house, cutting that cord and go into YouTube TV or Hulu or one of the other sources. So we recognize that there's this huge shift in the marketplace of people cutting that cord, and so we're having to follow the consumer wherever they go.
And we spend a lot of time doing that. Another good example is advertising on weather apps. That's something that we did for October Beef Month this year because everybody in Alabama has to check the weather because it changes every 30 minutes. So we spend a lot of time on those news apps, and it's a great way for us to reach people, even if they aren't necessarily the biggest sports fan. They still need to know what to wear when they get dressed in the morning.
And a bonus to that is that you cattle producers spend a lot of time on the weather app. We're checking for rain, we're checking for wind, we're checking for all the different things, praying for rain. And so you guys, through that, also get to see beef advertising because you're there as well.
Exactly. So it's a good balance of the two things of how to reach our consumers, also making it to where some of our producers can see that information as well, and putting it with something that they're going to rely on consistently because they have to check the weather.
Right. So, Josie, is this program that we're already doing, or do you see potential with any untapped markets? What's got your wheels turning since you've come back from Denver?
A little bit of both. So I spent a lot of time in Denver figuring out how we can operate some of the campaigns and programs that we're already running on a smaller funding amount. How can we get more bang for our buck? That's something I'm really big on and something that I spend a lot of time looking into, whether that's, partnerships with Alabama Media Group and figuring out which type of ads consumers interact with the most, or on the sports advertising side of things, is there a certain commercial that they prefer?
Right.
But then I'm also looking for new ways to use resources we already have. A couple of good examples of this is, some of the sports advertising that the national partners have rolled out that we can use in this coming year. Another one would be a lot of nutrition information that we got this year and ways to share that with local doctors' offices and local dietitians. And we're partnering with some of them to do some pretty cool things in the coming year. I'm not going to tease it yet because we're still getting all those plans in order, but we have a lot of avenues through them that we're able to utilize some relationships that we've already built, and then some different products that the national partners have rolled out that we can use for free of charge to reach these groups, which is great. Another new thing that we talked about, we've utilized it some in the past, but e-commerce is a really, really big thing right now.
And let's talk about real quick, what is e-commerce?
E-commerce is any time that you're ordering in our realm of things. E-commerce is grocery related. It can apply to a lot of other things, but we focus on groceries because that's where you buy beef. But anytime that you're ordering stuff online, And this was a real product of COVID. We saw that across the board. You know, everybody was placing Amazon orders or doing a grocery pickup. And it's something that's carried on since then. It's convenient. It's easy. People love it because they can swing by on the way home and pick something up, or they can have it delivered to their house.
Yeah, and it saves them money a lot of the time because you're not walking through the aisles picking up things that you don't necessarily need or that weren't on the list. I've learned that myself of when I do a pickup order, I'd usually spend less.
Right.
Because I'm actually getting just what's on my list. And so I love that shift. I love seeing beef moving in that direction.
And consumers love it. And it's an easy way for them to get that product. The only thing that we're running into is meat's one of those things they want to pick themselves.
Yeah, that's right.
And so grocery stores are putting a lot of dollars behind figuring out how to still get them a quality product, let them have some say in the product they're choosing. Some delivery services are starting to require that when they pick up a beef product, they have to send a picture to the customer so that they can choose between a couple steak options and things like that. So we talked through how to kind of narrow that down a little bit more, but then also some advertising options that are coming available through that. Because grocery stores want to encourage people to buy more groceries.
Right.
And a great way to do this is through recipes and nutrition information.
There you go.
And we have just talked about all of the beef nutrition information and recipes that are being developed. So they're working to really partner with these groups to provide this information to consumers and encourage them to add some beef to those shopping carts. Another thing that we talked a lot about is ways to reach consumers in places that they already are, and doing this in a less expensive way. So in the past, you know, it was the world of billboards and physical signage, and those things are great.
Yeah.
But production cost is high to get those all across the state.
Very, very high. Like one billboard to print, not even renting the space to house the billboard, but to print the vinyl that goes up on the board itself is about $2,500 to $3,000.
It's very expensive, especially when you consider that we're trying to cover the entire state of Alabama.
Yeah, we got a big state here.
So some other things that we're looking into is advertising on screens in various locations across the state. So grocery stores are starting to put in screens next to their meat cases and next to their checkout registers.
I've seen some of that.
And then also gyms is another option. You know, when you're there and you're running on the treadmill or doing whatever else, there are now screens up. Even gas stations have screens put up now. And so being able to capitalize on some of that, there's no production costs because it's completely digital. So all you do is send over a digital asset. And then you have some flexibility based on your plan of how many times it's going to air that day or how long the commercial is, or just some different ways to kind of customize those sorts of plans. So this is another opportunity that we're talking about with the national group to see maybe how that fits into the plan, whether it's something that they utilize or something that the state level utilizes. But it was a great conversation to have, and to also find out that they can look over some of that before we sign on with a company just to make sure that we're getting the best rates possible. That's something we work with NCBA to do, and it's a fantastic resource that they have. So we spent a lot of time discussing that and how it would fit into planning, whether that was for sports or grocery stores or gyms, to reach our ideal consumer.
Okay, so all of this information, good stuff. What's the next step? If someone is listening to this and is intrigued or maybe has some ideas, wants to get involved, whatever it may be, how can they do that? How can they get plugged in?
At the end of the day, we're working for producers.
Right.
We're working with producer dollars, and we want this to be a thing that producers want to happen. And so we really seek that input. The best place to start is the Checkoff Task Force. That is a group of people in the industry, whether that's your producers, your extension professionals, or partners that we work with, to kind of brainstorm before the next year and put together a bunch of ideas. So if you're interested on being on that task force, it's a one-day meeting where we just get together and come up with all the ideas and share them and talk through the details. Reach out to us. We'll put you on that list. We would love to have you and have those conversations with you, because every person has a unique input and we want to hear all of them.
Right, and that meeting is coming up mid-November, so keep your eye out for that. And if you're interested, just like she said, give our office a call. Our number is 334-265-1867. All right, this has all been so interesting, but you know what that sound means. It means Josie and I are going to wrap it up, but not before we give you 3 fast facts that we want you to know before we go. And this week, we're going to tag team them. Josie, why don't you give us the first one?
We talked a lot today about all of the advertising work that we do. And we talked a little bit at the very beginning of this podcast about how the checkoff program is run. One thing we didn't talk about is how the dollars are decided. So we have a checkoff council that sits down and approves the budget every single year, and we call that the marketing plan. For any producer that's interested in how our beef checkoff program dollars are spent, you can view that online. So go to our website, bamabeef.org/checkoff. We have the marketing plan listed on there. You can look at the line items and the details behind it if you're interested in how those dollars are being spent across the state.
Yep, and again, that's bamabeef.org/checkoff. Second, since it's spooky season, as you're applying fun costume face paints or eating your chewy candies, remember that you're utilizing byproducts of the beef industry. It's the gelatin that often causes candies to be chewy or is derived from beef animals' hooves and horns, and things like paints and makeup products are derivatives of fat from a beef carcass. So if that all sounds gross, yeah, we get it. Chalk it up to being in the Halloween spirit.
It's so amazing how many different products contain byproducts of the beef industry. It never ceases to amaze me.
Again, we like to say that we use everything but the moo.
And to round us out for today, I just want to give another quick reminder. We have an upcoming event that we would love to see people at.
Right.
So the Bainbridge Block Party will be on Tuesday, October 29th. It's from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and it's here downstairs and out in the parking lot at the museum, 201 South Bainbridge Street. So come see us. We'll be passing out burgers, and we're partnering with a lot of our other commodity groups down Bainbridge Street to offer some agriculture education to those who work in Montgomery. But even if you live outside of Montgomery, we would love to see you. It's a great event, and everybody always has a great time.
Yep, it's going to be a good time. Hope to see you guys there. All right, guys and gals, that's all we've got for this week. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you learned something new and that you're more aware of the mind behind the mechanics of beef promotion efforts here in the state. Happy Halloween, happy October Beef Month, and come back more for next week.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cattle Connect, brought to you by the Alabama Cattlemen's Association. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when our next episode goes live. And until next time, remember, beef, it's what's for dinner.